Fiction and Plot. I'm Scott.
I'm Nelle.
And what we're going to do today is our wrap for the month of May. But before we get into the wrap, we feel we should definitely acknowledge and talk about what's happened with George Floyd and the race riots and all of
Uprisings.
that. Uprising. Yeah. Firstly, we hope that systematic change happens because of these riots. We fully support the violent riots. Violence is the only way this will change. Peaceful riots have been done for decades. Centuries. And it's still a massive problem. So we fully support the violent uprising, and we hope that systematic change happens as a result. We hope there's a sudden change for good.
I guess as far as the anti-racist movement, this is something that we have been personally discussing, I guess not so much on BookTube, but definitely in our personal life for a long time now, because it's a long-standing issue, and police violence is no small part of the systemic oppression of people of colour.
And the systemic oppression of a lot of people. Police force is like a socialist institution paid for by the masses, used to keep the people in power. They're not your friend. But there's certainly.
But Scott's personal issues with police aside, now is the time to uplift the voices of people of colour, and within Australia, not just American issues of systemic oppression. This is certainly an issue that extends to Australian treatment of our Aboriginal culture.
There's two stats I want to share with you. If you're an Australian watching this and you think that Black Lives Matter is a US movement and something you don't need to worry about, I want to share these two stats with you. That in Australia, the Aboriginal population makes up 3% of the population and 30% of the inmate population. In Australia, if you're a police officer and you kill an Aboriginal, then you are more likely to be promoted than you are to face charges.
Yeah, which is pretty gross. There's a couple of charities that I would like to sort of mention as far as supporting people of colour in Australia, and particularly Indigenous Australians. Pay the Rent is a growing movement that I think is super important. We live on stolen land and we should be paying rent. 1% of your income is the suggested amount. So jump onto paytherent.com.au, I think it is. I'll put the link in the description.
Just here.
And see how you can help and where that money goes to help in Indigenous communities. The other charity that I want to mention is called Sisters Inside. Their focus is on women and girls who are incarcerated and providing services to ensure that their human rights are not infringed upon and that they don't end up as statistics. A super important charity that does things like raise money for women who are in jail purely because they haven't got the finances to pay fines and to pay their fines and get them out, and from everything from that to healthcare and sexual assault prevention in incarceration and decarceration programs and all the rest. Fabulous work.
Yeah, absolutely. That is an excellent charity.
Yeah.
The last thing I would want to say is, as white people, we really need to acknowledge, actually not even white people, just that everybody, we need to acknowledge that we're not perfect, that we all are racist. Some of us are more racist than others and all of that, but we're all racist. So if a black person says, hey, that's racist, or a woman says, hey, that's sexist, or a gay person says, hey, that's queerphobic, or whatever, listen to that person.
Yeah, listen to the voices of the oppressed. They are important. I think that's enough before this becomes a performative white person video about racism. Let's
go into what this video is really about,
which is our
wrap.
Yeah.
So, how many books did you read this month?
I read 1 million books this month. So what I did at the start of the month was I figured out that I do most of my reading on the weekend, and in order to increase the amount of books that I'm going to read, I need to make more time during the week to read. And then I found an app that allowed me to track the time that I read and have the instances of my reading and set goals and all that sort of thing. And so I started using that, and I haven't actually used it all month, but I think what it did was it allowed me to look at my patterns and reanalyze them and try and reset them. And so instead of 1 or 2 books this month, I read 8.
Nice, that's really well. So, I read the most books I've ever read, I read this year, I read 12 and I had a DNF, which I'm quite excited. I've had 2 DNFs in a row, and I already have a DNF in June. I'm starting to actually move on when I don't enjoy a book. So I'm very excited with that.
I don't know if I support this DNF situation, but...
you're a purist. Once you start, you've got to see the course.
I really do want to see the course, and I finished a book that was a bit of a slog for me this month, so I'm feeling quite self-righteous.
I wonder what book
that was. Give me a book and we'll talk about it.
Alright, so we actually read quite a few books that are the same, and we're going to start off with those books.
Because he's a copycat.
I am. I definitely copied you on this tiny little one.
So this one...
the Yellow Wallpaper.
The Yellow Wallpaper.
By
this is by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. This is a bit cheeky calling it a book, but it is. It's printed as a book. It's 30 pages long.
Actually, if you look at the back, it says it's 30 pages long, but it starts on page 7.
It says it's 37 pages long.
Oh,
I already did the maths.
You did the maths, okay.
So this was immersive and awesome to read. I really enjoyed it. It freaked me right the fuck out, and I had to stay up and read another book before I could go to sleep.
It was so well done.
It was really, really well done.
It tells the story of a woman who moves into this house, and her husband is a doctor, and he says that she needs rest, and she's resting in her bed, and she's looking at these horrible yellow wallpapers, and she says they've just got to go. And from there on, I don't know whether this turns into a psychological thriller, a gothic horror, or a feminist novel, but I think it's all 3.
Yeah, it totally is all 3, and it's such a quick little read, and so immersive, and so gothic. It's just so gothic. And I truly loved this. I picked it because Murphy Napier read it, and it sounded like it. There's no way you can lose. It's 30 pages long, and so I got it, and I'm glad I read it. It's good.
Yeah. Well, I should say I gave 6 4-stars this month and 1 5-stars, and this was one of my 4-star reads, and I have to say I'm feeling quite mean with some of these 4 stars that I'm giving out, and this is definitely one that I was mean on. The next one we've got is The Farm by Joanna Ramos. Again, you read this one before me.
Yes.
We
read this for the Asian Readathon. It was a Filipino book.
Neither of us had read an author from the Philippines before.
So we got a new country. Both of us got a new country in our Read Around the World project. It looks much bigger than it is.
Yeah.
It's just like a big print. It's so I feel like if this had been pitched a bit better, I would have not read it. If it had been pitched more accurately.
So it was pitched quite well, actually.
It was sold to me, but I thought I was picking up a dystopian book about commodifying pregnancy and a farm where women are paid to be surrogates, essentially.
And it certainly started out like that, didn't it?
It did, and that is the setting, but that's not the book
and
you're getting.
It really feels to me like the first 50% of this book was written by somebody like Suzanne, what's her name, who wrote The Hunger Games. What's her name?
Collins.
Yeah, it really felt to me that the first part of this book was written by somebody like Suzanne Collins, and then they handed it over to somebody like, I want to say authors that I've not read because I have preconceived conceptions about them. So I'm gonna pick on Stephanie Myers because I hear that she's racist. Someone started it and you were having this epic dystopian novel that was going to be really good, and then it descended into a high school bitch fest.
I feel like it got to the level of things that already exist and things that are already a bit questionable, and then it stopped there. It didn't take it that next step of speculative, which is, I guess, where the dystopian makes you uncomfortable, is by taking something that's real and making it a bit exaggerated and speculative and showing what it could become in, a worst case scenario, or extrapolating that moral thing, that extra step, and showing what you're doing. And it just didn't go that next step. And it made me question what the point was.
Yeah. There was something, I thought this was something very interesting about this novel was the complete absence of male characters in it. Male voices. I thought that was an interesting trope. It would have failed the Bechdel test if the Bechdel test was about male equality instead of female equality.
Yeah, there were very few dialogue lines spoken by male characters, and I thought that was very interesting.
And it was definitely a deliberate choice there. That was not an accident.
Yeah, for sure. And just every character that could be female was female.
Yeah.
As opposed to the other way around.
No, I disagree. They could have made some characters queer to make them all female, but anyway. I thought that this book wasn't without its merits. It wasn't particularly good, but it wasn't particularly bad. I gave it 3 stars. I
thought it was fine, but it wasn't the book I thought I was getting, and I would not have chosen to read this book. So
I wouldn't have chosen to read it.
It's just not for me.
Yeah.
Next.
This is probably the most read book on BookTube because Asian Readathon and Cindy did a read along for Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng, and this was my 5-star book.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. This is totally Scott fiction.
It is.
It definitely had anyone who's read the book by that turf.
The Casual Vacancy.
It did have a similar feel.
I think.
To begin with,
to begin with, I think this book it was well written. It was really crisp in its writing. It had well-defined characters who were very different, had their own motivations, and acted completely in accordance with those characters. Very well-written characters, and it had storylines. Sorry, not stories. It had themes that were explored. They just explored the themes without casting moral judgment on it, and let you come to your own thought about it. And
I really enjoyed the dual perspectives, like this. Every issue was examined from both sides with empathy and with an understanding of where people's alliances are built and where their emotion can lead their logic, and it was very nuanced and quite good.
And how good people can have bad opinions is essentially one of the things you could get out of this book.
Yeah, I thought most of the characters were redeemable. There was one in there that I thought was just a waste of space. But you could see why. And I think that's really interesting. You could see that she was damaged, and you saw where her damage was. And so she wasn't irredeemable, she just wasn't a good person.
Yes.
And I thought that's real.
Actually, she was a good person in the start of the book, wasn't she? Because...
Was she?
Oh, wow. She was...
I think she was trying.
She was trying, yes.
I really loved this. I personally love a book that advocates for people to live an unconventional life. And I do think that this, while it tried to be a bit dispassionate and view things from both sides, I think this really did show the validity of an unconventional life. And I love that. That's a theme that sits close to my little heart.
It does. Yeah, but to summarise, really well written, and it's just a safe book to pick up if you might not give it 5 stars, but I damn guarantee you won't be giving it 1 or 2.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this. I don't do stars, but I think this is one of those books that in 5 or 6 years I'll probably reread.
Yeah. All right, next one. What is...
Gimme.
Oh, so we don't have the last one that we both read. Because you've lent
I've
it
lent
out
it
to
out.
your bestie.
Yeah, she needs to read it. I've made a video on this one, which we'll link in the description. Kim Jong, born 1982. Made me have all the feelings. And I also think everyone should read it. I read it at the start of the month and Scotty read it at the end of the month.
It was my last book and it was your first book or something like that, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That tells the story of a lady called Kim Jun, and it just takes you through things that happened in her life, and it points out bias, doesn't it? And
I'm not just biased, but just like, it was so, it was so mundane. And that sounds like a negative, but it's a positive, I promise.
I have never seen a fictional work with so many references and footnotes.
Yeah, it was really good.
And if it's completely appropriate, that adds to the novel.
Yeah, I do appreciate that there was research done to back up the points that she was making with her fictional characters, and just everyone it should be required reading. This is certainly not a big trauma book. Like, this is not women have big trauma book. This is a women are exhausted book.
Kim Jun could totally be a happy character. She wasn't, but she could totally be a happy character, but she gets...
I think a lot of women are happy with the life that Kim Jong led, but I think they're also limited by it, and we just accept, because that's what exists.
Definitely found it educational if you are a man watching this, and if you are a straight man or a bisexual man in a straight relationship. Is that what they... Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, it's certainly not an offensive way to say it.
Yes. I do think you need to read it, because I think as a man, when you look at what feminism is about, it's not about what this book is discussing. And what this book is discussing is important, and it's not like it's something that you don't relate to. It's something that...
A lot of the things in here are the things about feminism that personally affect me, and I have it good. You know, I've got a feminist husband. I am my own boss. I am actually very privileged. I'm white. You know, I'm super privileged, but a lot of the things in this book were the things that I am terrified of, or the things that I am frustrated by. And I think most women would recognise most of the issues in this. And if you can read this and get some insight into what your partner goes through, it's gonna make your life and their life better.
I just want to... This was another book that I rated 4 stars that I am now thinking, geez, that's a bit bloody mean.
It was a really good book. I thought it was so well written. It was really concise, such a quick read, so powerful. Good one.
Yeah. Now, you read a book that I have already read, and this is the controversial read of the month, isn't it?
This is not controversial. This is rubbish.
This is controversial.
It has taken me about a decade. No, a long time though. It's only 184 pages long. It is the story of a young psychopath, and it was boring. it was filled with minutiae and the point of it, the big reveal, the grand twist was trite and ill thought out. And I hated it.
I loved this book.
You didn't read it this month, though.
I didn't read it this month, but if you want to know what I thought about it, go on and have a look at our top 10 books of all time list.
So this is a really big one on Scott's list, and I thought it was terrible.
Yeah, okay, well...
Sorry.
I disagree.
I don't often get absolutely nothing out of a book, and I feel like that was actually a waste of my time to read. Sorry.
All right. Well, if you have read that book, let us know what you thought about it, because...
We don't agree. Yay!
That's one of the books that I think 5 stars isn't enough for. So,
oh my god, no!
Like, that's
if
how
I gave stars, I still wouldn't give it any.
So, on an average basis, we'd probably still give it 3.5 stars.
No!
You'd give it
Negative stars. Negative stars.
All right, now we've got 3 more books of yours.
Yeah, that'll do. Oh, you can randomise it. It's fine. I read The Alchemist. This is a fable. I don't think... I quite liked the beginning and the setup of this book, but I sort of... The ending lost me a little bit. Someone who I think of as super smart, our friend Jade, said this is one of her favourites. And so I was expecting a lot from it, and that was probably a bit of a downside. But I felt like the themes were a bit sledgehammery, and the ideas weren't new to me. Maybe a younger Janelle would have really liked this. If I had have read this in my early 20s, maybe it would have been more exciting to me. But it wasn't exciting, and the ideas weren't very new, and they weren't done in a particularly special way. And the writing was okay, but there was nothing particularly beautiful about it. Like, it was fine.
We actually had a really good conversation about this off camera, where you said that all of your favourite books were from a particular time in your life, and how the time in your life that you read a book affects how good
I definitely think that's true. Like, most of my really favourite books are from my late teens and early 20s, where you're going through that really formative stage where your values are being formed and ideas are super exciting and you're idealistic and all that sort of thing. And all of my super favourites really were read in that time period. And I think that all of my super favourites really changed who I am as a person. And I think now that I'm old, it's much harder to change who I am as a person with a book. And so that bar is much higher. So I do think that if I had read this earlier in life, it would have been a more impactful book for me.
If that's a topic you'd like us to actually have a discussion on and do a video on, let us know in the comments, by the way.
This was another fable that stuck with me. This I was much more engaged with. As a fable. It is the fable of the hen who dreamed she could fly. And it's all about family and being a social outsider and found family and love and motherhood and sacrifice. And it's just this little hen. Oh, this little hen.
Could she fly?
No.
Was that a spoiler?
No, she's a hen. Like, this is not mystical or magical, she's a hen. Do hens fly? No.
Sometimes they can glide. If you push them off a roof, they won't hurt themselves.
This was my second Korean book for Asian Month, which I know is a little bit cheating Cindy's rules, but
you hadn't read a Korean author beforehand.
And now I've read 2, because Kim Jong was Korean also.
Yeah, so I don't feel it's massively outside of the spirit of it.
No, I also felt like this was a sort of different sort of part of the culture. Like, Kim Jong is very modern and feminist, and this is a little bit harking back to traditional fables, although it is a a modern telling. I believe it is built on their tradition. It was so lovely, and the character of the little hen is really very, very memorable, and a super quick one. So you should read this one too. 134 pages, like super quick, super lovely.
No, so this is Mad Adams by Margaret Atwood.
So this is the third and final installment of the Mad Adam trilogy.
And you read this while I was reading another book. I don't remember what it was.
But we're in the same room.
We're in the same room, and I kept looking up because you were giggling.
She's so funny. She's so funny. And it's a book about an apocalypse, but she's so funny.
So if you like apocalyptic stand-up comedy, I'm not actually sure that's what it's about, but is it now?
No, she paints characters so beautifully, and when they're funny, they're funny. Like, she's just this really tickled me, this one. There were a lot of jokes in this one. Anyone who's begun the Mad Adam trilogy should read all three of them. I found Oryx and Crake is the first one, and I picked up the second one immediately. There was just that impetus to keep going and really, like, not even take a breath. And I didn't have that real urgency to read the third one at the end of the second one, but I think it's the best. I think the third book is potentially the best of the three. If you're stuck at the end of number 2, pick up number 3. It's totally worth it. You'll giggle your little butt off the whole way through. And that's not to indicate that it's light. I think the 3 books could be treated almost individually as far as themes, etc., etc. But this book also ties it all together into a big, beautiful, just bundle of message questions,
Could you start with
conjectures.
This book or The Year of the Flood, or should you read them chronologically?
You should read them chronologically. You definitely should. Just because you'll meet characters in the wrong order. But epic and easy to read and a giggle. So I was really happy to finish them up on that note.
Is that the last of your books?
That's it. That's me for the month of May.
All right. The first book I read for the month was our book club book, which you didn't finish. It is
I'm a bad person.
Dead Souls by Nicola Gogol.
But Scott was the only one in our book club who actually finished Dead Souls.
And can I tell you, I was not the only one who did not like that book. In fact, everybody did not like that book.
I will finish it at some point, but I've got to say it's not my favourite Russian piece of work so far.
Look, it should be really funny. It is a dark comedy, a dark satire comedy, ridiculing society about a man who goes around buying dead souls in order to gain political power and an estate. It sounds very funny, and it's Russian, and we all know that Russians are hilarious when they want to be. It should be a good book. It's repetitive. It's you can see how you can see why it was good, but it's just so repetitive. It's not well written, and the worst part is, and I nearly just rated this 1 star when I finished, because I thought that this was a deliberate thing by the author, but it finishes with the line, and there the manuscript breaks away. And I was so annoyed and so angry, I thought that's a worse cop-out then, and then they all woke up and it was just a dream. And anyway, it turns out that Nicola Gogol was a little bit angry at something and burnt his works. And we don't actually know how it ended because he...
Because there the manuscript broke away.
Because there the manuscript broke away. So I am angry at Nicola Gogol, but for the wrong reasons. I feel like all my 4-star books this month have been really harsh and could have been 5 stars, certainly the ones I've discussed so far, and I'm adding a third one to it, Nadia Murad's The Last Girl, My Story of Captivity and My Fight Against Islamic State. She's a Yazidi, so the Yazidi are their own separate nationless population that live mostly in Iraq. They're often viewed as a subset of the Kurds, who are their own nationalist people that live in Iraq and Turkey. If you know anything about the Kurds, you'll know that they're basically killed by people, right? And then the Yazidis are persecuted by the Kurds as well. So we're talking about a minority within a minority. This book is broken into 3 parts. The first part explains what it is like. It explains what it was like growing up in Yazidi culture. So it basically gives the story of Nadia's childhood, and it does it by and uses that to explain culture of the Yazidi people. That is super interesting. If you only read one part of the book, read that part, and there's nothing nasty in that part. Well, it hints that nasty things will happen, but there's nothing too nasty in that part. Super interesting. Then it talks about her village being invaded, her being captured. She's basically become something called a sabucha in the Islamic State. That basically means she's a slave prostitute, and she gets handed around and sold as a slave prostitute. Then she escapes. The story of her escape is ridiculous. I feel like in order to escape from that culture, you need as much luck as she had, and she certainly had tons of luck. And now she's gone on to win a Nobel Prize, and she advocates for women. She advocates for victims of war, and one of the lines in it that I found particularly compelling was, I never thought that I'd have something in common with a woman in Rwanda, a country I didn't know existed until after I escaped Islamic State. And she just compares how everything that they're doing in Islamic State, which is evil and horrible, how it's not original, how it's happened time and time again. It's quite a powerful novel, and it's a non-fiction novel as well, so highly recommend that book. Yeah. It's a bit bleak.
But sounds like an educational read and a worthwhile perspective.
The next book on my list is The Satanic Verses by Salman Rushdie. This is my DNF for the month. Salman Rushdie is clearly one of these authors that writes beautiful, beautiful stuff that means billions of different things, and he thinks about every single line. But this is nonsensical rubbish. And the bits that I didn't understand what was actually happening. I hate books that don't have boundaries, when you can read a line and literally anything could happen, and that means something, and you're meant to interpret what that's meaning, and suddenly the man has turned into a goat and he has been sodomized for no reason that I can see. I don't understand why I'm reading that and why it's in there, and it doesn't, like, as a story, I'm not enjoying that story, because I'm like, he could just turn into an eagle and fly away and be safe. Or
yeah, there's no tension.
I don't know what's going to happen. And when I did understand what was going on, I found the themes that he was talking about boring and quite simple. And considering how complex the writing was and how smart you would have to have been to understand the whole thing, I'm sort of like, who is the audience for this book? These themes are themes that I personally struggled with when I was 13. They're themes about whether... and I mean, look, other people will struggle with them at different ages, but what is God real? Is God not real? What's the implication of God being not real? Why did we create him if he is not real?
I do think we talked about at the time that it was written at a time when religion was actually a powerful part of your politics and your upbringing, much more than it is now.
And I suppose, like in places in the US, that's still the case, maybe.
And where you might not throw off your religion until later, or even question it, or even doubt it, because the indoctrination was much different to what it is now.
Yeah. But yeah, I just the way I would describe this book is, imagine somebody got your present and it was a treasure hunt, and in that treasure hunt you had to like buy snorkeling equipment and fight like man-eating sharks and risk your life by jumping through fire, and then you finally get this gift and it's wrapped in like 20 meters of cellophane and bubble wrap, and then when you get inside it, it's a Tic Tac. Right.
So you didn't like it then?
I didn't like it. I DNF'd it. I got halfway through it and I said, this is he's just indulging in crap. I do not recommend that book.
I do appreciate that we're collecting some food descriptions. Like, if it's light and fluffy, it's a meringue book.
What is that? This is a poo book.
This is a Tic Tac.
It's a Tic Tac. It's a Tic Tac treasure hunt book.
Yeah, I love it.
Then I read The Odd Women for Oddreadathon that was hosted by Katie and Marissa. I participated in this because George Gissing was an author that I wanted to read this year at some point, and I thought, well, what a good excuse to...
Yeah, this was on my list. I really wanted to get to this, but I didn't.
And this again, this is one of these 4-star books that maybe I was a bit harsh on. This is just a really good classic, an early feminist novel. It is about 3 sisters and 2 of their friends, and it just takes you through the struggles that they experience in day-to-day life and the importance of marriage and the role of women and whether they should accept marriage, reject marriage, what they should do, how men mistreat them. There was not a male character in this book that I thought was nice, and considering one of our protagonists fell in love with one of them, I found that a bit, problematic, but in a good way.
Yeah.
And I do recommend that book. If you like classic novels, if you like Hardy, you'll probably like Gissing. It's that moralistic theme is there. He doesn't have, he's got a little bit of a different writing style. Doesn't have that rambling nature, but that moralistic theme is there. Then we did 1,000 Splendid Suns. Oh, I did 1,000 Splendid Suns. I don't know why I'm using the we term. I'm not the queen. And this was a brutal book that I rated 4 stars for. I do not think that was harsh. I think that this was a solid 4-star book.
Oh, sorry, I was going to say, you love a brutal book.
I do love a brutal book. I do love a brutal book. That is true. And also, I don't think 4 stars is a bad rating for a book. I just want to say that, like, if I read an entire month and all it was 4 stars, then that's probably the best month's reading I will have all year. This is a story about two women and their partner, and how their partner mistreats them and how they rebel against that. It's done in the backdrop of Afghanistan during the takeover of Afghanistan by the Taliban, and the takeover of Afghanistan and the relationship of the women are sort of interlinked and mirrored, and you can see what's happening in the relationship is also happening in the country. It is horrible. The scene that stays out in my mind is not the nastiest thing that happens in the book, but the husband gets upset at his wife's cooking and forces her to eat rocks and says that this is what it's like eating your rice. And
nice.
She breaks her teeth on rocks, and the cruel nature of that, I want to say punishment, and that implies ownership, and that's exactly the point of this. But
yeah.
Like, if somebody loses their temper and hits somebody, I go, well, that's horrible, but that's not planned. This is so cold and calculating. It just really stuck with me.
Oh yeah.
If you've read The Kite Runner, this is by the same author, and that's
Obvious.
it's just it is. Then I read this one.
Woo!
I'm not going to discuss this one other than to say that we have a video reviewing this one. I'll put a link in the description. This is a 4-star one that I was probably a bit harsh on. This is whimsical, enjoyable, and fun. Read it. You won't dislike it.
Yeah, it's a good one.
And doesn't take itself seriously. Then one of the more disappointing books I read this month was The Poppy Wars by R.F. Kuang. What was the book that you said? The Farm. You said The Farm was misadvertised to you, and I think that The Poppy Wars was misadvertised to me. It was advertised as adult fiction when it is young adult fiction. It was almost a really good novel. It mirrors the Japanese invasion of China in the Second World War. It's got drug addiction in it, and it could really have been amazing, but it wasn't. And one of the things, it starts off, if you do have this book, what I will say is read the first part of this book where she is at the school, because the main character Rin is from a disadvantaged background, and she's got everything against her, and she fights back and she wins, and then she has more against her and she fights back and she wins, and that's just such an enjoyable trope, and that happens quite a few times, and it leads up to something, and that's all really enjoyable. And if the book had have ended with the thing that it led up to, that would have been a really good, enjoyable YA fantasy novel. In fact, you could even cut the fantasy at that point, because there was really very, very little to no fantasy in it at that point. There was really foreshadowing of the fantasy that was about to come. Then suddenly war starts, all the characters you know disperse, you have a new set of characters who have just appeared from nowhere. Everybody is a shaman.
You're so angry that you have to get to know new names.
I really hate, I feel settled in a book.
It's like when you're at the pub at 2 o'clock in the morning and all the people leave and you've got to make new friends.
Yes. I go home.
You too, you grub.
I go home. I've invested in these characters and you're just chipping them off, and then you're spending less time introducing the characters that the book is about than you are these characters that were really used to introduce the main character. I don't get it, and the way it ends and where it goes to from there was just whatever, really disappointing.
Grumpy.
But that wasn't the most disappointing book I read this month. The most disappointing book I read was Kazuhiro Ishiguro's The Buried Giant. This is disappointing because Ishiguro is amazing. He's an incredible writer, and The Buried Giant does not live up to his reputation. It is not very good. It's the story of Beatrix and somebody I've forgotten the name of, which is very apt because this book is about forgetfulness.
Oh no, this is the one about they have dementia, the narrators.
Yeah, they don't have dementia. They suffer from memory loss due to a dragon who has this thing called the mist, and I have described it to you as dementia because that's actually what he's talking about.
Yeah, okay.
I was,
Okay.
I found it confusing. I found it felt a bit first drafty. I thought the publisher should maybe have given it back to him and said do a better job. And I kept wondering, these characters forget that they have arguments and their motives keep changing and they're lost. This is an example of an unreliable narrator, not because they're evil or twisted or have biases or something, but because they literally cannot remember what happened to them yesterday.
This sounds so interesting and thrilling, and your hatred of it really sounds like personal taste to me.
Look, I love Ishiguro. He's an excellent writer. I believe that he intended to do everything that I don't like about this book, right?
Yeah.
I believe that it was all intentional. He wanted to create this feeling of confusion and loss, which the characters were feeling while you were reading the novel. It just so happens that I associate confusion and being lost with bad writing and books that I don't enjoy. So it's almost like he did his job too well. But I felt like he could have maybe rewritten that a little bit better. And
you know when you review something that you didn't like, and I'm just like, I really, really, really want to read that now.
Yeah, well, good. Good.
That's where I'm at.
I want to give reviews where you can do that, but yes. So that was, I gave that one star because I did. But if you like that book, would not be surprised. But
tell us about it.
Yeah, Fell from Grace from the Sea next, which is a Japanese classic.
And it's not about the sea?
It's not about the sea. One of the characters is a sailor, but at no point is he in a boat. It's about a creepy 13-year-old boy, his mother, and his mother's new boyfriend.
Oh.
And the 13-year-old boy is just creepy, an arsehole, and privileged. It is a story of rebellion. It is about teenagers rebelling against authority and their parents. I don't know what I thought of this book. I still don't know what I thought of this book. It will stick with me though.
Okay.
I gave it 3 stars. And yeah, if you have read, it's very hard. It's so short, and it's one of those stories that is all just one event. So I can't talk about the event because that's spoiling the ending.
Oh, I get what you're saying. I felt like I couldn't, especially with short ones, like My Little Hen book. I don't feel like you can give a lot of the plot, but that's what I'm struggling with reviewing this. But it's creepy in quite a weird way. Then The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy. This has been on my TBR for a bit. It's been quite high up on my TBR for a bit, and maybe the anticipation on my expectations let me down a bit because it was a bit average, I'm sorry to say. I gave it 3 stars. It tells the story of this family in 2 different time periods, and in one of these time periods, a cousin from England comes to visit the family in southern India. I think they're in Kerala. Anyway, this cousin dies, and you don't know why this cousin dies, and the mystery around it is slowly revealed as these 2 time frames go forward and back. The cousin is the same age as these 2 twins, and in the later time period these 2 twins are grown-ups and they're meeting again for the first time in, I forget how long, but in a considerable period of time. Yeah. What are you... I read this and I really loved the writing, but I was confused by the ending.
Yeah, the ending is... I want to say what happened because I want to talk about the ending, and I don't really feel like it's a spoiler.
It's completely a spoiler. You can't actually talk about this book to anyone who hasn't completely read it. So read the book, and then we'll talk to you about it.
If you have read the ending, why do authors feel the need to do that?
Yes. I didn't
She's
get
not
it.
the only one. This is actually a much more common theme than I feel.
But
Does it happen that often in real life?
I just legitimately didn't understand why. I just didn't. It didn't make sense to me. I felt like it was. weird and unnecessary.
I felt like it was metaphorical and you could interpret it to mean a whole lot of things.
Yeah, but you could have done all of those things in a different way that wasn't weird and unnecessary. But in the comments.
It was definitely a choice. The author chose to do that.
They made a choice. I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, it's been a long time since I've read it, but that's my lasting impression was, huh? Jump in the comments and continue the conversation. I'd be really interested if you've read any of the books that we read. What did you read for Asian Readathon month? They need to rename that something that I can remember. Okay, just for me.
What's confusing about
everything?
You read Asian books. It's a readathon.
It's so hard for my brain to. Anyway.
I mean, Asian April would have been easier.
What did you learn? Did you learn something exciting and new? Did you find a new author? Tell me all the things. I want to know all about it.
Thanks for listening. Remember, Black Lives Matter.